Hey there, Mallory Wilsey here, Chief Producer of the Enrollify Network. And I want to take just a moment to tell you about another show on our podcast network that I think you'll love. The EduData podcast is your no-fluff guide to the data driving higher education. Forget about data silos and disconnected stacks. Timothy Davis and Jamie Boggs, two of Element 451's data analysis experts, bring you straight into the heart of the numbers that matter. With sharp commentary and rigorous research, our hosts break down complex data points and actionable insights you can use. Whether you're an administrator, educator, or just a higher ed enthusiast, EduData is your key to unlocking the data behind academia. New episodes drop every Friday morning, and you can subscribe to the show by visiting podcast.enrollify.org or just search the EduData podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where each week we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade focused on student support and digital experiences. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. The Higher Ed Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network, a robust collection of shows designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Welcome back, everybody, to another wonderful episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast. This episode is another kind of milestone or sort of benchmark, sort of waypoint in my journey exploring AI and all it has to offer. I've kind of been holding off and waiting to have conversations like the one we'll have today, where it's folks, working really hands-on in the trenches, building tools with AI versus getting to like kind of existential about like, what does it mean for education or humanity and those sort of things. So I feel like this is going to be much more, relevant and engaging and kind of tactical conversation that I'm just very excited to have. So Kayvon, if you want to introduce yourself briefly, kind of go over your professional background, how you got to be where you are today, and then we'll talk more about the work that you're doing right now.
Sure. Thanks so much, Dustin, for having me. Kayvon Touran, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Zal.ai. We help organizations with contextualization, assessment, and measurement of their learning and development programs. I've been working in early stage technology startups for the last decade in a variety of roles. My passion is definitely product management, and I spent the last 5 years working out of Noodle in New York, which is where Dustin and I got to meet each other. Most recently, I was in charge of building out a lifelong learning platform that led to a bunch of really, really interesting conversations with, different people in higher ed, specifically in continuing education and professional study and non-degree learning. And a lot of those conversations gave me the inspiration to start Zal.
I know it's always funny, like as I've been doing this for so long, and like I start to like talk to people, over the years and stuff, and it's just like we're gonna be like, oh yeah, remember when we talked like however long ago, and it was like just when you were starting and everything. So yeah, still early days, and I think that kind of unique nexus that you kind of are like you kind of have absorbed all this sort of exposure to higher education, these conversations with folks and lifelong learning and different things like that, and then like you said, working a lot of early stage tech startups and everything. So there's that idea of like how can you kind of conjoin the two to sort of reach our full potential and everything. So if you want to dig in a little bit deeper with what inspired you to found Zal.ai, just sort of like that sort of genesis moment and just kind of those moments of when you're actually kind of putting the pieces in place to create it.
I had the opportunity to, like I had mentioned, sort of speak to a number of leaders at schools of continuing ed and professional study and basically get a better understanding of sort of what their strategy was working with organizations, both for asynchronous learning, but also and sort of like off the shelf learning, but also for custom ed. One of the things that really struck me was how many times I'd speak to someone and they'd explain to me when we're working with a company, oftentimes they'll come to us and they're not entirely sure what it is they need to be upskilled on, who needs the upskilling, or how they're going to measure the efficacy of the learning, but they definitely need some learning. And so they've come to us. And that always struck me as odd. Institutions are kind of the de facto when it comes to high quality learning and training. And, everything from obviously the pedagogy to the instructional design, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to the sort of assessment of the workforce and both like before and after, and doing so in a way that also in a lot of times mirrored the type of content that they were providing, because a lot of times we're talking about content in analytics and now increasingly AI, high technology, there seemed to be sort of a disconnect. And so that's where I kind of had this moment with my co-founder where we're like, it's so fascinating how there's such a race constantly to be generating the next new piece of content. But what it feels like the world needs is not necessarily just more content, but more context, and specifically these organizations. And so, how could we be this contextualization layer for organizations to truly understand not only the skills and competencies that are requisite with the roles in their organization and how they can, basically strategically align that with the objectives of the company, but also the sort of, professional development goals of the individual. But also really connecting that to then the training that's recommended and, how we're really like measuring the efficacy of these programs that a lot of money is being spent on. So that was kind of the big aha moment for me. And so about 9 months ago, we took the plunge and we've been building pretty furiously ever since.
Yeah, that does really seem to be coming up quite a bit in some of the conversations we've had here. Is like we live in this abundant time. Like, yeah, there's no shortage of information or ability to search that information, but like, yeah, that context being, I think, a missing ingredient where you can just be sort of awash in whatever you're looking for, but you certainly need to be like educated to discern and scrutinize, misinformation and those sort of things. But even just sort of like I know I want to go here, like with my career, or I want to learn this thing. It's like, okay, let's kind of draw any kind of like zigzaggy path or whatever, and like put some context or some guardrails or whatever, And it's not even about, I guess, being. 'Cause I realize kind of the way that I'm describing is like being like prescriptive or restrictive, but I think we're at this point where there's kind of a breaking point of that like that abundance and just like no shortage of options and all that, and there's just like a complete shortage of that context or any sort of guiding force or anything like that. So it just is like certainly for like education and career sort of workforce stuff, it's just like there's so many different organizations working in this space. So I can see just like you recognizing that opportunity to sort of like be of service and trying to just help individuals navigate this, help organizations better position themselves to sort of like give that context and everything. So yeah, it's really fascinating stuff, and I think again it feels like a very relevant and sort of important kind of application of AI versus it just being like, what if, like, it's just like, okay, we're like aiming for a target here. Like we're going for it. And I guess it's just sort of like a brief anecdote too. I mean, like you mentioned being in a lot of early stage, tech startups and everything. Like, what has the journey been like so far over these past several months of like, creating your own business? I imagine that it does feel different, even though you've been in those sort of, moments of like building and building furiously and everything. But like, what does it feel like to be the co-founder,
All of the experiences that I've had before, it really feels like there's this culmination and being able to think about all of the different scenarios I found myself in, the different departments I was working in, and how those experiences are sort of combining into this moment. I'm just grateful for it, truthfully, thinking back. I'll talk about that from two different perspectives. So, from one perspective, I think anyone who's thinking about starting their own business, specifically like a tech startup, I really think that there's tremendous value in working in an early stage, technology company. When I say early stage, I mean full of risk and uncertainty. Like we're talking probably, I mean, earlier the better, frankly. I've done the full gamut now from pretty much, this would, I guess, be my pre-seed take at things, but pretty much Series A, Series B, like I've had those notches in my belt. And it's really helped me deal with the uncertainty, the constant moving target, deal with the nonstop struggle of finding product market fit, or once you find it, how do you find it again for something else to expand sort of your offering? And so I think without having the those sort of experiences, it'd be really hard for me to navigate sort of like what I'm doing now. And it's served me really well in that capacity, because I do think that's probably the biggest difference. Working at a Series B startup, there's just a lot more security. I mean, there's not that much security. It's not working at a huge company that's well established and mature, but there's definitely more security. And there's security in feeling like, "Oh, I did a job well done today because my manager was happy with my performance." I never feel that way. I'm constantly concerned that I'm not doing enough, no matter how much I'm doing. And it's always, painfully apparent to me what's going wrong, as opposed to sort of thinking about all the things that are going well, which again, in a sort of a more traditional work environment, you're constantly reminded of if you've got a good manager, at least hopefully, or you've got a team and you can sort of, talk about what's going on and sort of process information in that way. So yeah, it's been very different. And it's also, I'd say the last thing that's really profound is having a good co-founder and someone who you connect with on like a relationship level. I know that's like pretty trite, but it's really highlighted how important that is, especially as sort of like what I'd consider like my first real go at building my own company. It's so important to have someone whose opinion you trust, whose opinion you respect, whose worth ethic you could respect. Because all of the things I just mentioned, all of the uncertainty, all of the different sort of balls that are constantly in the air, it's helpful to have someone to process that with. So
I would never imagine doing something like that without sort of like experiences that are at least maybe even like near peer of like, like you said, it's like maybe I haven't literally had like abundance of that sort of experience, but like a lot of sort of seeing different moments in that journey and can kind of like maybe like work backwards or talk to people that that maybe were there before you. But the idea of like, oh, I definitely wouldn't have done this like several years ago prior to having any of those experiences, and I definitely wouldn't have done it if I was doing it a lot. Like it's like, yeah, I could never imagine doing something like that completely by myself. Like I would need someone to kind of like commiserate with or celebrate with and just bounce things off of and everything. So I think those are kind of important reflections, I guess, of sort of figuring out like what if you're sort of marinating on doing something similar, it's like figure out maybe where it's like, oh, I maybe I'm missing this puzzle piece of like, how does a company get from here to there? You might want to just ask people or talk about it, or seek out experiences to get kind of a firsthand look yourself and kind of to sort of process and interface with that. But yeah, I just figured it'd be kind of interesting to see kind of how it felt. And I guess it's yeah, equal parts sort of exciting and sort of nerve wracking and everything. Like you said, it's like it's your thing, but you also like you answer to no one, but also kind of yourself. But like it's just such a weird kind of position. And to kind of just circle back though, and really try to bold, underline, circle kind of what you're working on, and I guess sort of fit it within the higher ed context in particular, because it sounds like, I mean, you could certainly see the applicability of what you're doing in a lot of different kind of contexts and everything when it comes to just sort of like, maybe like workforce development or something, just how are you kind of training people to do a job? And obviously that can happen in a lot of different ways. Like you said, I think there has been more often than not sort of a grounding within institutions of higher education to sort of like say, if you do this, maybe you can, get preferred admission or whatever else. But at least for now, just speaking specifically within higher education, how do you see AI kind of writ large, I guess, and certainly, you're working on something in particular, you can kind of ground this in. How do you see AI helping to capitalize on higher education's potential?
yeah, I mean, it's such a big question. There's so many different really, really exciting applications. I'll speak to something that we're doing that gets me really, really excited in context of uh, higher ed, and it ties into workforce development, but it's really all about learners, and that is the potential of using AI for assessment. And I think that's a topic that I've heard of a lot of people talking about, but I really think it sort of paves the way for us to stop and think about how we can create more interactive, more realistic type, almost simulation training is what we call it in context of how we're using large language models in our sort of assessment engine. to provide, not only an assessment of proficiency, say in our context for workforce development around a skill or a competency, but really high quality feedback, which can then feed into a recommendation system of what to do next, what to learn next, how to learn it. You create almost this closed loop system. And this layer, I think, has tremendous potential. And it's the one that gets me very, very excited. So
Hey, it's Mallory, Chief Strategist of Enrollify. Why travel far when an exceptional higher ed conference experience awaits from the comfort of your campus or home office? I'm thrilled to announce that every single session at the 2024 Engage Summit will be live streamed. And the best part? Registration is free. Many of your favorite Enrollify creators are presenting. Maya Demishkovich and Jenny Lee Fowler will teach you how to craft an AI-powered social media influencer strategy. Jamie Hunt will help you unlock the AI revolution in your team. And Shane Baglini and Allison Tercio are teaming up to boost your productivity with generative AI. Plan out your dream conference by scoping out the agenda and taking note of the sessions you want to tune in for. Visit engage.element451.com and register yourself and your team for free today. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, I think it's that idea of, you've had these institutions that have existed for a long time, and, there's been quite a lot of effort and focus put on just sort of like access for its own sake, like kind of on principle. And, I think we've kind of reached the apex of that. And how do we sort of keep that momentum going in the right direction and not just sort of like, because that would be the idea of like we're grappling with sort of the implications of, people can get in or are prepared to be successful in higher ed, but like the price point, like we haven't really done anything about that. So now we have this ballooning student debt crisis. Like, so the idea would be, okay, well, if you want to get to this target in terms of whatever skills you're trying to learn, a job that you're trying to get, how can we try to do that as maybe cheaply or efficiently as possible and all that, like in keep that kind of lean, because I think we're just seeing kind of the idea that the pendulum is swinging back the other way, where like so much was done to make access for students, but now it's swinging back because people are like, oh, it's not really relevant, it's too expensive and all that stuff. It's like, that idea of like a platform and kind of just what you're working on, that's sort of like, I guess my take on it is that it could be relatively agnostic of like, you don't have to necessarily buy into one institution or something. Like the idea of like, if you're learning things, they could say like, here are a lot of ways to learn that if you want. Maybe, it served you one way or another. Cool, you've done that. Here's where you can go next or something. And it's sort of just like contextualizing your learning, how to sort of build upon that learning and how to keep moving in the right direction towards where you want to go. Because I think it's like you get that at best when you like, enroll in a program at a university, and hopefully they have the bandwidth to sort of give really good contextual support and things. So I think just like trying to at least kind of advance the discussion and have folks recognize the utility of AI to sort of help here. And it's the idea of like, you've built something amazing. You've built an amazing institution, an amazing brand, an amazing, myriad of programs. And, you've got all these great people to teach. So how do you now try to help, in sort of the guided pathway sense, I guess, the idea of like, recognize where you are and where you want to go and kind of just kind of flesh out, that in between place. Are these the kind of things, I guess, that you're sort of thinking about and considering and sort of interfacing with?
definitely. I mean, there's a couple of things that really resonates with me. So one, I think some of the adjectives that I'm thinking of are like everything that you just said, but like how can we use AI to personalize it, to make it dynamic, to make it realistic? I think that's where things get really, really interesting. And so, as one very basic example, like if I am working at an organization and I just had some training provided to me, let's say on, I don't know, project management. Now, the way this typically works, we could think of that training on so many different modalities. Maybe they bring in a mentor at the company who's already a subject matter expert on it. Maybe they purchased some custom training from a university. Maybe they gave me access to a library of courses. Whatever the modality of learning is, at the end of the day, they really want to understand, okay, so we paid for that thing, you did this thing. Now, are you actually competent in this skill that like we're trying to help you develop. And what I've seen a lot of times happens is there's some kind of like crappy quiz. It's not interactive. It's not personalized. It's not dynamic. It's not realistic. It just feels kind of made up. And you know, as like a tenet of learning, like just generally speaking, we're not so great at analogous thinking and our ability to just say, okay, well, I've learned about this concept over here. Now let me think of if I took that same concept and tried to apply it to my day-to-day work, how would I demonstrate that? It's hard to do that. And so I think there's such an opportunity then to help that individual demonstrate that proficiency using like a realistic example, using role playing, using there's a variety of different assessments that we're developing around this that a doesn't require us to rethink all of the content that we've ever developed around learning because that's unrealistic, but b also allows for a lot more flexibility in the type of learning that might be most impactful for the individual. Maybe someone responds better to coaching, maybe someone responds better to courses, etc. And so I think at the end of the day, and we've, people have talked about competency based learning for a long time, like if we're able to actually measure someone at the bottom of this journey that they've taken to learn this new concept, then that there's a lot of power in that. So that's just one thing that, as you were talking about sort of higher ed and generative AI and what it means that, really struck me.
As I was sort of reflecting as you were starting to talk, I'm just like, yeah, absolutely. Somebody could build that and it would be much more static of sort of just like navigating pathways and all that. But if it's like personalized and dynamic, it's sort of flowing with you and sort of, maturing and evolving and all that. And even with the example that you gave around like competency based learning, which I do think is like, yeah, just been sort of simmering for a long time. And maybe AI is the thing that sort of just like gives it this massive shot in the arm. The idea that like, yeah, if you're participating in assessments, like everybody kind of starts at the same place. You sort of, go through, interact with the content in a course, and then you start interacting with a AI empowered sort of assessment tool. It could sort of evolve with you of like, depending on, things you get right or wrong or what, like that could just be something that sort of amplifies that experience and takes you from wherever you are towards, where you want to go in kind of most efficient and kind of engaging way possible. Cause I think that is just like a tough thing where like I think competency based experiences have just sort of, I don't know. Yeah, just like for one reason or another, just not hit the mainstream, I guess, in the way that I think a lot of people would hope for. And certainly, there's a lot of other systemic barriers, I think, to that. But I do think that that's going to be this sort of through line story, where I know I've seen a lot around just much more renewed focus and emphasis on workforce and micro credentials and different things. Like, and I think they're all going to kind of intersect and collide and sort of amplify each other. Given all of that sort of potential and complexity and sort of work that is happening and everything right now when it comes to sort of AI pathways, learning experiences, all this kind of stuff. Like, what excites you, sort of keeps you motivated about this current moment in higher education? Because I feel like there's no shortage of headwinds and, jobs to be done here.
I mean, honestly, I think the same thing when we first started. I mean, we combined sort of this understanding of how non-degree learning operates within like a corporate context and where the opportunity was there. But also, I mean, this was a very personal experience that I've had. I'd go to my manager and say, hey, I'm a product manager. How do I become a senior product manager? And I'd get kind of this hand wavy response that drove me insane because it's like, look, I'm here. I know we have an L&D budget. I know like you want me to develop myself because that's to your benefit as well. And you can't answer this question for me. And that always annoyed me. And then it's interesting. I found myself as a manager with employees now, on my team coming to me asking me the same question and me doing like the same thing. And then I was like, okay, like there's something fundamentally wrong here. I've used that anecdote a lot because for me, it was like, okay, there's a big opportunity here. That's a thing that keeps me really, really excited. Like for me, the high level sort of strategic benefit for organizations, the benefit for the managers and their ability to get visibility into how people are like, what they want to actually do and the way that they develop their careers, and actually running performance management centric to that. And then being able to contextualize that gap between where they are currently and where they want to be at the company with all of the learning that's available to them. Those are the bigger things that I think, like, using my head, I'm like very excited by. But when I think about like the feeling that I had as an employee, feeling frustrated that I couldn't get that guidance, and also as a manager, and not being able to really like provide what I felt was like so fundamental as to what is a good manager, that gets me really excited. And it gets me really excited not only in terms of the product that we're building, but the brand and the community that we have the potential to build. And it's centric to something that's really important to me, which is education.
We've talked a lot, I think, on sort of the individual level, the sort of those friction points that they might encounter, but even just recognizing that sort of like organizational development imperative, that sort of performance management, supporting people's learning, their career goals and everything like it. That's just, that is also important, helping people, achieve their goals, but then also, any organization. It's kind of funny where they're like, yeah, it's like higher education institutions need to be mindful of this as well, of like, retaining and, recruiting people into their organizations by leveraging either like their own, abilities or those of their neighboring institutions or something. Like there's just, and I guess my brain is spinning a bit now of just sort of that, what the implications of what you sort of outlined there, of just sort of harnessing higher education's potential to just sort of like, get people to where they want to go, and that it benefits the individual, benefits organizations, and I guess even society at large. It's all really important stuff. And I think, we'll give you the floor to end as we always do. If you want to share a final thought, a call to action, whatever you'd like to wrap everything up.
I think it comes right back to that, which is like, if you are an employee who feels frustrated with the lack of what feels like transparency around how to progress at their current organization, if you're a manager who feels like they wish they could provide more guidance to their employees around professional development, if you're a learning executive or director of learning, or anyone who's focused on workforce development at an organization, I'm interested in speaking to as many different people as possible who are sort of experiencing this problem along the value chain. And likewise in higher ed, and specifically schools of continuing ed, schools that are responsible for non-degree learning. I think there's a really, really powerful partnership potential with higher ed when it comes to solving this problem, because the better companies are at contextualizing the opportunity here, more accurately around the job architecture, the career paths within the organization, the more it really paves the way for learning to be injected in a very precise way to drive, again, the strategic goals of the company as well as the individual goals of the employee and the workforce. So
it just feels like a really relevant and important utilization of higher education and AI, and these organizations that really care about performance management and bringing all those people together, and at the core of it, a really amazing digital tool. And what you're building. Happy I got the opportunity to kind of talk about the journey with you and share out what you're doing with our audience here. And we'll certainly have ways to connect with you in the description for the episode. And just really excited to just keep watching and seeing all the cool stuff that you do as we move forward here. And I'm sure we'll have to have you back at some point to keep reflecting on the journey and everything. But just really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.
The Hired Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances you like all the other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing constantly, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better hired professional. Our shows help you find your next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from people like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Dave Kibbolds, and Eddie Francis, as well as so many other of your favorite leaders in higher education. Enrollify is made possible by the support of Element 451, a leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.